My name's Chuck Durfee. I'm the Secretary of the Board for Agile Denver. We're very happy to be here at Mile High Agile 2015, which is our fifth and largest conference we've ever had. And the conversations have changed from 2011. Back then, I found that we were talking a lot about what is Agile, and now we're talking about how can we apply Agile to the real world. And we've been talking to a number of our sponsors, coaches who have donated their time, and attendees, and they're bringing this idea of agility on to much larger and more calcitrated cultures than ever before.
My name is Brian Tu, and I'm from Agile Transformation. And I'm just really excited to be here today. Love the fact that we can get together with like-minded individuals who really have a passion about improving how we do our business, how we work together, and how we build creative solutions for things that people really need.
My name is Mike, and we're here with Dice.com. This is our first time at Agile 2015, and we're out here to meet technology professionals, introduce people to Dice.com, and we're also recruiting for our local office in Centennial, Colorado.
The conference today is just amazing because lots of people, lots of like-minded individuals. Ultimately today we have some great speakers and great people that have some great guidance to provide. Love the keynotes, love the sessions, and I love the atmosphere and the passion here.
I'm beginning to see some trends here in the Denver area. It used to be that it was very difficult to find jobs. Scrum Master wasn't really even advertised when I started with this organization, and now it seems like everybody's interested in finding a certified Scrum Master in order to help them transform their organization. So we're really excited to be hosting this conference for you today.
Well, welcome to the last session, last time slot at Mile High Agile. We've got 5 generous and amazing executives who decided to show up and help share some of their wisdom with everyone here today at Mile High Agile. My name is Brad Swanson. I'm with Agile 42, and my colleague Richard Dolman is here as well. He's over there. Thanks for raising your hand there. So. Want to thank everybody at Mile High Agile for letting us sponsor this event, and hopefully this becomes a recurring event here at the conference. So Agile 42, we do coaching and training on Agile, but this isn't about us here today. Feel free to talk to us afterwards, but it's all about the fine folks we have up here in the front. So let me introduce them, and we'll give them each a chance to talk a little bit about their own organization's Agile and Lean journeys and what has helped them, maybe what they've learned along the way. So they're each going to get a few minutes to share a little bit about their experience, and then we'll have a few questions for them, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. So why don't we kick things off with Mr. Warden over there.
My name is Brian Warden. I'm an IT director at I'm an Agile enterprise coach in training. I would certainly not claim to be such a thing. Kind of a 20-year background, kind of through being an analyst to a developer to being a project manager, program manager, those types of things. I just want to give you a little bit of background of where I'm coming from to give you some context to how I might answer questions. I work for Nelnet. Specifically 5280 Solutions, which is the IT component of Nelnet, big student loan company. I can't help you with your student loans, so sorry. We are a high volume loan servicer, and with multiple systems across .NET, SQL, and our base system around an IBM iSeries. We have about 250 IT associates, and we are a highly regulated government contractor in addition to our private products. We are transitioning primarily from a traditional waterfall method, a lot of big documentation up front. We have a pretty command and control structure that we're working to move away from. I think that we really are only about a year into our transformation, and we've really only had teams formed in the last few months. So we're pretty early on in our process. The primary problems that we were looking to resolve, we wanted to improve quality, we wanted to improve our delivery time, we wanted to implement more frequently. be more efficient and to bridge an ever-growing divide between our operations and IT department. And that's was a serious part of our endeavor. So yeah, we're only about a year in, and we have really seen somewhat of a downtick in our efficiency as we transform, but we're really beginning to start to see some positive results, but we're very early on. Just some real quick key things we've figured out so far, I think, is that just culture is absolutely critical. This is not a change in methodology. You've heard these things before probably, but it just became so crystal clear to us just as we start to get this thing on the road. So it's kind of the perspective I'm coming from. These guys are going to know a whole lot more than me, but if you want the newbie perspective, that's what I'm here for.
Okay. Well, thanks, Brian. Why don't we move on to Rick?
I'm Rick Newman. I'm head of engineering at ReadyTalk. We are in the business of audio and video and web conferencing. I've been the head of engineering for a couple of years, but I've been at ReadyTalk for about 6.5 years. Started in engineering and kind of came up through engineering and did a stint as Scrum Master for a time before I moved into kind of a management role. We started our Agile journey, I guess, almost as soon as I started there, not because of me, it was just more coincidental, in hiring our first Agile coach. Since then, we've gone through a couple of different changes where we increased the size of our Agile coach team and later decreased it as we tried to move into trying to understand almost what Brian just mentioned as far as having an enterprise or an engineering-wide Agile coach. So we've gone through a lot of changes, I guess, as we've tried to understand how does Agile apply, not only in a business our size. We're about 200 people. We're primarily engineering-led, so about half of ReadyTalk is in the engineering organization. Not only that, but also that we're founder-led, so we still have the group of individuals that have found the company have grown that company for about 14 years. We're maybe, like I mentioned, we're about 200 people. We're over 30 million in revenue, but trying to discover how to take that founder-led ethos and that kind of that energy and spread that out throughout the organization. As probably many of you know, if you're started by entrepreneurs, they're very smart and driven individuals, and they're very invested in the product and the company that they've created. And kind of growing that energy, that background, that context, and that trust into the rest of the organization can be a trial for a little while. So I would say a little bit with Brian, he said we're just starting there, but our biggest challenge right now is still kind of that inculcation of Agile and Lean principles. Not really down, because like everybody else, I think experience-wise, we start at the team level, kind of a groundswell of support and interest, but bringing that learning and that wisdom all the way up to the top of the organization and letting them see how greater efficiencies and empowerment can happen throughout the organization through Agile and Lean principles. So I think that's the biggest thing I've learned is the importance of a couple of different things. Vocabulary is one. Just bringing a common vocabulary across the organization, not just to the engineers, but to the product owners, the analysts, and certainly the leadership. Bringing that vocabulary so that as we discuss things in various planning meetings or status meetings, everybody's kind of on the same page. But the second thing that kind of goes against that is compromise, where I've had to learn that it's okay not to be an idealist and to stick to kind of an idealistic view of a particular vernacular that we might want to introduce, but be okay with people using terms that they might not completely understand or disagree with you. It ties a lot into what Mike talked about at the keynote this morning, that it's kind of okay for me to know that, well, I'm probably making some assumptions, probably some very serious assumptions somewhere, and it's okay that we don't see eye to eye on everything as long as we're headed in the general direction. And I found that to be a pretty helpful guide or a compass as we kind of move forward. So that's kind of where we're at, is thinking about those things, yeah.
Thanks, Rick. keep things moving over to Mark.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mark Curry. I'm the Vice President of our Enterprise Services Delivery at Oppenheimer Funds. Probably more relevant for our conversation this afternoon, I've been the executive sponsor of our Agile program for 8 years now. So, just to give you a little background from where I'll be coming from as we're speaking today and questions that you might want to lob up. We've been through a lot. We've been through the ups and downs. And I think the best way to describe our journey is one of adaptability. As you might expect, when you start out 8 years ago, there's a lot of energy. Much like Brian was talking about at the beginning of their journey, we had a very real need. It wasn't so much quality, but it was, we were doing these massive implementations, and at the end of it, you could barely even get a clap out of the room, right? It was on time, on budget, and so what, right? And we had just finished a huge implementation, and a group of us got together and said that we can't do that anymore. We can't waste millions of dollars and get to the end and have our solution be barely relevant. So we knew that we needed a more collaborative approach. So our story started out pretty good. We had great sponsorship all the way from the top, the president on down, the CTO, the CIO, everybody sponsored it. And we started our journey, 8 years ago. Tremendous success. A lot of projects that people thought couldn't be done Agile were done Agile, and were very successful. But I would say over the last few years, things have changed quite a bit. Some of it really good and some of it less good. The good stuff that we're seeing is even outside of solution delivery, software delivery, we're seeing, you're seeing storyboards up in areas that don't even know they're doing Agile in the business side. In the print room, you're seeing people embracing the notion of storyboards and checking stuff off as it's done. It's really done its job in that, it's permeated the organization. From a software delivery perspective, it's been a very cyclical thing. I'd say still mostly positive, but the big adaptive change for us was when we first started, we built these teams, and these teams became entities in and of themselves. They had names. These teams would be together for 3 and 4 years, and people would shape work to fit the team, right? Because they wanted to use that team. They wanted it to be Agile, and that worked really well for 3 or 4 years. But the way we've adapted now, we've had to become much more just in time, right? To where, we've been working hard to tell folks, don't worry about making the work fit us. You tell us what the work is, and we can shape the teams, to fit the work. And that's been a pretty big change. Some of these names, when you have names, and you know how teams make up really cool names that are really catchy, and and everybody knows who they are and all this. It's been a pretty significant change for us, and even the size of the teams. We went from pretty large teams, that would have upwards of 8 to 10 team members, down to teams that only have 3 or 4, in some instances. But really, the best way to describe it is a lot of adaptability, even terminology. Brian was talking about how it's okay to kind of say things your own way. Even when things are wildly successful, terms wear out. People get tired of hearing about, product owner this, product owner that. They get tired of hearing about stand up this, sprint that, story points, all these things. And something that we found, pretty beneficial was to kind of go with whatever the terminology is making the most sense with the new team that you put together. Really, the new stakeholders that are around you, whatever resonates with them, don't be all coppish about, we got to use the right terms. Use the terms that really resonate with people, because you'd be surprised how quickly you can turn people off just with the conviction that you have over a name of something. I would say another part of our big, of our journey has been, don't be afraid to make the tough decision. It's amazing how empowered you will find yourself. When you start delivering and you're successful, you become very empowered, and you can become a little bit lackadaisical. When you see a problem on the team, make sure you do something about it. If you sense that executive sponsorship is waning, don't think it's just going to come back. You got to devise a strategy to get to get that executive back on board, figure out what that trouble spot is. But definitely don't be afraid to make those tough decisions, even if it's for the sake of change, right? Even if you're not quite sure, because you can always change it. But keeping it fresh is very important. 8 years is a really long time, and if we looked the same way that we did, 8 years ago, we'd be long since dead from an Agile perspective. And then, of course, delivery. From our journey, really, we can talk about adaptability. We can talk about making tough decisions. We can talk about being inclusive. But then, at the end of the day, delivery is what really is king. Just make sure. We always made sure that we're doing a good job of delivery. And when you sense that you're on that epic that's going nowhere, when you sense that the product owner's lost touch with their stakeholders, and it's and the value proposition just simply not there at the end of the epic, stop it. Don't just deliver for delivery's sake. So those are some of the key, the key pieces from our journey, and I'll hand it on to our next panelist.
All right. Well, thank you, Mark. And Eric, take it away.
Thanks for having me this afternoon. So I'm kind of the odd bird on the panel and probably at the conference because I work at one of the federal labs in Boulder, specifically for NOAA, the U.S. Department of Commerce. I know a lot of you are probably sitting there thinking, wow, a government employee, so we think lean, we think agile when we think of the government, so that must have been pretty easy to bring that culture into the U.S. government. But you'd be surprised, there were some challenges. To give you a little background on my experience with Agile, it started when I completed a NOAA leadership training program and found out at the end of that unfortunately I was going to have to go on into leadership. And so I took over the deputy director role at our lab. The first thing I did was organize a senior staff retreat, and one of the topics that came up was our software development team. Basically, to a person came to us and said, this is not working, we're in real trouble here. And so I started to talk to him, and I said, what are we facing? And so some of the things was, it was hard for our teams to adapt to requirements. So they would get off and start building something and give our scientists something 6 months down the road or 9 months down the road that the scientists would say, that would have been great to have 3 months ago or a year ago. That's not what I need anymore. And that was frustrating. We were working at an unsustainable development pace. I use the term a lot, hero mode. Our coders were all in hero mode, and we had some incredible heroes. And especially in retrospect, as I got to understand what all they were doing, how many fires they had to stomp, we were lucky to get as far as we did before we lost those heroes to new jobs or burnout. We had no teaming structure whatsoever. So to tell you how we were organized, again, because I'm from the science community, it tends to be organized by the scientists and what grants they get. So they would get grants. Those grants would come with software development, infrastructure development, and they would build a team around that project. And so that meant sometimes our teams were 1 or 2 people. A lot of problems with not having a teaming structure. And then one thing that I've really come to appreciate is we had no concept as an organization of taking a breath and asking, how is this going? Which is so fundamental to my experience in Agile, is every once in a while you just have to stop, take a breath and say, is this working? And if it's not, what do we need to do to fix it? So I had been fortunate enough in this leadership program that I had taken to get some training on Agile and recognized a lot of what we were going through was in the Agile manifesto and said, all right, let's try to do that. One of the things that we did right with that was, I'll have to admit, an accident. We ended up training the entire, doing an introductory training of what is Agile to the entire organization, including our scientists, including our managers, including our data managers. Everybody was all hands into this training. And the reason I say it was an accident was one of the tough things in the federal government is we don't have huge training budgets, but per person, by having everybody show up to this training, we could get our software development team in there and get trained. Well, in the end, that turned out to be the very best thing because we, as a couple of people have mentioned, going from what we were doing to this was really about being in a culture shift. And so including everybody in that was essential, was absolutely essential going forward. So we were lucky to get that done. The other thing we've done right to get us to where we are is constant communication to the point where people are sick of it. When this was coming in and this culture was changing and the way people's software was being developed and teams were being stood up, we were constantly communicating what was going on, what they could expect, how to understand that, to the point where they would finally say, "Uncle, I get it, Eric. You're doing this. We understand it very completely." And until I heard that, I kept doing that communication, because it was easy to have people be lost and then come back and say, when did this happen? Why is this happening to our organization? And the last thing I wanted to say about our startup was professional training. So we initially thought, well, we'll try to set this up ourselves. We brought in a consulting team that helped us really train our teams, get our first team going, get our Scrum Masters trained, made an investment in it up front, which really did help us down the road. And those teams now have gone on to train other teams and to help us grow, but really making that investment up front was essential for our getting out of the gate in a good way. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Eric. And last but certainly not least, Susan, the stage is yours.
Hi, I'm Susan Courtney, and I work at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Nebraska. Let's see, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself first, because I think it might give some indicators on why I'm so passionate about Agile. After college, graduating with a computer science degree, joined the Navy, which probably makes about as much sense to you guys as it did to my parents. And I went to aviation officer candidate school and ended up flying for 6 years with an air crew of about 16 people, was our average crew size. That was, I think, one of the pivotal things that helped me understand the power of teamwork, power of collaboration, communication, transparency, all that good stuff that goes with Agile. So that's just a snippet from my past that I think becomes important when I stumbled into Agile. So our company, I came 8 years ago to Blue Cross, and we started our Agile journey about 6 years ago, and it was because of a project that we were pure waterfall, and we didn't do waterfall very well. And we were doing a project that was a year-long project, mandated, which a lot of ours are, and we were nowhere near going to make the deadline, and it was a compliance kind of thing, so you couldn't fail. I mean, if you failed, I probably would have been out of a job, and we would have been incurring pretty hefty fines, that sort of thing, so big stakes. And about a third of the way through that project, with it being on a very poor trajectory, I truly did stumble onto Agile through just a professional development thing I was doing. I went to an after-hours meetup that was talking about Agile, and I thought I should probably learn more about this. And I went in with all the typical naysayer stuff running in my head. Well, it would never work for us because we're too big, we do highly regulated stuff, we're, all the things that you hear why Agile won't work. And as I was listening to the gentleman that was sharing his success story speak, he was kind of negating all of my little naysayer headlines that were running in my head. And then when I found out where he worked, it kind of nailed it. He worked at Mutual of Omaha, which is highly regulated and a lot larger than we are. And so all the stuff that I was telling myself stories about just simply wasn't true. So after the meeting, talked to the consultants that were putting on the meetup and said, hey, you think this would work for us? And told them a little about it. And they ended up coming in and we made it. They helped us with Agile. So we didn't set it up for success. We didn't train anybody. We were doing it as the airplane was flying. But during those subsequent, what was left of the project, 8 months, saw amazing cultural changes, especially around communication. There had prior been just ridiculous divide between IT and every other department in the building based on some historical inability to deliver and communicate. And that started to heal. Even during a really, really emotional, hard project, it was starting to heal. So it caught the attention of me and a couple of my colleagues. And like, gosh, what would happen if we actually did it, with a trained team and started at the beginning and all those other things that you would normally do to set it up for success. So we tried it that way. and it worked amazingly well. So then we started to grow it, and 6 years later now, well, actually, 3 years ago, we decided to take it enterprise-wide, meaning not just all of our IT teams were already Agile, but we started applying it in operational departments. We now run our governance on Agile principles. Our executive staff meets in a room that has all the artifacts from our how we do Agile governance, and that was mandated by the CEO and his EVPs because of the success they saw during those prior years. So it was kind of cool to see it come along. Lots and lots of pain stories along the way, like probably everybody has, but it's been fun to see it grow, and it will be fun to see where it can go from here.
All right, so I wanted to maybe fire off one or two questions for our panel and then turn things over to the audience, see what questions you have for them. I know there's a couple people here that might want to heckle Brian a little bit, which I might even encourage. That might be fun to see what happens. Brian's going to hate me for that. Okay, so my first question for the panel. This morning we heard from Mike Cohn about hindsight bias, right? That looking back, we forget how little we knew back in the past. So if you were to start things over today, if you're able to start your Agile journey over, what would you do differently now with this knowledge you've gained over the past years? What would you do differently with that benefit of hindsight? And don't have to go in order here, so whoever wants to answer, fire away.
I'll start. I don't know that I would have done a ton different. I mean, my temptation would be I would have trained people first. I would have communicated more. But if I'm perfectly honest about it, if I had done that, the organizational immune system would have killed it. So that probably would have been my tendency, but it wouldn't have been a smart move. Although there was some training that was done, and this is purely divine intervention or something. It wasn't my doing. We had gone through as an organization some training on crucial conversations, confrontations, and influencer, which is a Joseph Grenny suite of communication techniques that really help you in resolving conflict. That was like magical to help us as we went into that first project I talked about, because it helped us to understand how to have those conflict-ridden communications. So I would have liked to be more structured, but I think in our situation, it kind of had to be a little bit covert until it was so far down the road that nobody could kill it. So
I'll add that one of the things I would have done was present Agile to the organization and to the people as more of a framework than a solution. So you hear a lot about Agile and you think, great, this is a solution for our software teams. And, even the developers we were working with were like, so standing up 15 minutes a day is going to fix our software. No, it was the beginning of a cultural change. And that cultural change had to start with the software teams and had to go to our management and our scientists and the whole thing. So, when it arrived, it was, hey, Agile's here and it's going to make things all better. And it really should have been, we're shifting as a culture, we're going to a new way of doing things, and this is some of the tools that are going to help us get there. I think that's how I would have done it differently to begin with.
I think a big thing that I would have done differently is we have two major offices, one here in Denver and we have one in New York City. And we started the Agile journey here in Denver, and we really focused on it. And it wasn't until about 2 years into our journey that we started looking to do it out in our New York office as well. And I think to do it over again, we should have found a way to get us both going at the same time. I don't want to say it's that New York's never caught up with Denver. It's not that at all. It's just that, we evolved very differently and at very different paces, and we've never really developed a big time, a true synergy between the two deployments. They're very different, and different's good. But I think we could have done a much better job about leveraging lessons learned and that type of thing, had we kind of started our journey at the same time. So if you have co-located opportunities, it's something to consider.
I think the biggest thing that, if I look back and think, could we have done something differently or even sooner, it'd be closer to sooner. About a year and a half ago, Enterprise Agile Coach started kind of an enterprise Kanban board that tracks, it's a little bit like a portfolio view, but it starts to track projects and the epic part of those projects across an enterprise board that involved all the departments through ideation and development and marketing and release. That has spurred so many great conversations across the department heads that I wish that had happened earlier. It in and of itself, it didn't fix anything, of course. But it caused a bunch of great conversations that did end up fixing a lot of things. For instance, the first thing that we really noticed was we never told marketing anything at all. And a week before we'd release, we'd let them know, hey, this is coming out, and you probably have to do something about that. Send an email or tweet.
Whatever they do.
Tell a friend. But that was a huge enlightenment, at least at that department level of who we were leaving out and how to start those conversations earlier. So that I think would be the first thing that I would hope we would initiate earlier on.
You should see the one at Blue Cross Blue Shield.
It's a serious one.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I guess I would jump up a little bit of what Mark said in that mine's almost the opposite, right? We did a pretty big bang approach. We found that we tried to pilot it, and we found that there was a whole lot of discussion that didn't necessarily apply to everybody, so it got kind of weird. So we said, all right, fine, we're just going to go for it. We kind of big bang approach, and I think maybe we should have been more patient and let it be a little bit weird for a while, rather than just, going so big bang, because it just creates more chaos. But it keeps people in alignment, so I think there's a pro and a con.
All right, so how about we turn things over to some audience questions? I have a few more questions I can throw in there, but no shyness going on here. Hands are going straight up. All right, so our volunteers will bring mics around.
Let's see, Rick, you started to touch on it. I'm really curious to hear about what's happening at the executive level. So what is happening, whether it's agile portfolio management, or culture change, but actually more about the portfolio management. So we have about 1,300 employees, and we're a defense contractor, and we're implementing it almost across the board. We're not quite to the non-technical teams such as finance or HR, but we're not doing Agile for software development. We're doing Agile to run our business, and I want to know what you guys are doing to have that conversation. And tactically, what are you doing?
So we have weekly kind of stand-ups with the executive team and a few other attendees around this board, and our board consists, and it's gone up and down. We started with almost every, I want to call it an epic, but almost every group of stories that each team was working on. So the board was populous. It was very busy. And because of that, it was so busy that we thought it's so noisy that it's really hard to get any sense of kind of coherence out of it. From that, we kind of moved on to, as far as background, we got closer to, well, what's the feature level that we're working on? And then a couple of months ago, we started realizing, well, now we have big features consisting of a whole bunch of epics that might have milestones that involve releases, that things are being pushed out, whether or not they're being turned on for some subset or all customers or not. But because they're so large, they're just kind of sitting in those columns literally for months. So now we're kind of moving back to trying to understand, okay, well, how can we make these smaller, not so we can just see movement as movement, but so that we can have conversations around available functionality or functionality that's available to customers that's not being turned on, or that's not being presented to everyone. Maybe there's a small subset. So what we do is every week we have that conversation, and the hope is that as we see this functionality that's either near there or being held up because of, if we would just add this one more feature, this would be the perfect product, right? And our aim is, and I would say it's maybe happened once, it's more an ideal, But our aim is to just continually bring that in front of the executive team and show that there's functionality and there's a product ready to go. And the only thing that's holding it up is us saying that we just don't want it out there. It's there. We can turn it on. They can have some bit of what we consider important functionality, but we're not turning it on for whatever reason. Typically, it's because we have a beautiful vision of our finished product in our mind, and we can't do that. We can't release it until we can release it in its totality. So a lot of that, I would say tactically, a lot of that conversation happens around why aren't we putting this out yet, and why is this list of features so long? Why is our MVP so large? What part of your beautiful vision are we missing, or is it necessary?
And I would say for us, we have a couple of altitudes that we show. We have a really high altitude that the level of work, it really does move pretty slow because it's a very high level. And we review that more on a monthly basis. Our weeklies, I dropped that down to a lower altitude. That's in another room across the hall where the leads from the various Scrum teams meet to do a Scrum of Scrums and coordinate any activities that need to be coordinated between teams, talk about any delays in features that are expected, that kind of stuff. There is some flow back and forth, of course, if decisions have to be made. The only thing we really rely on the executive team for is to make sure we have a 1 through N prioritized enterprise backlog, and then breaking any ties if that can be resolved at that Scrum of Scrums level.
I think that's key, especially in the beginning, is figure out maybe just 1 or 2 or 3 of the hottest topics for your executives, communicate just around those, and don't let it get the noise of those, the room across the hall, you know? Make sure that those initiatives are getting the highlight, because you can get lost in too much detail, and I think is what you said as well.
Yeah, we've kind of, as times progressed, we don't really engage the executive level too much in backlog management or any agile terminology whatsoever, really. We keep them focused on what's our strategy, what's our roadmap look like, because we learned kind of early on they didn't really want to learn a whole lot about agile. They just want, okay, if you got a great way to get stuff done, we're all for it. But yeah, kind of keep them focused on the roadmap, and even as it relates to our project management office, there we've actually kind of taken great pains to make sure that we're not doing anything special for agile versus something that's not going to be done agile. Get the projects out there, get the priority, get the value-based priority out there, and then once it actually gets approved and the project's kicked off, that's when I would say agile kicks in. We start creating backlogs and storyboards and all those types of things.
I'll add just a little bit, which is the way I took your question. So for us, the executive team has an important role because we found that agile confined to the software engineering part of our house just didn't work. Basically, we've tried to put in a software agile teams and not have agile management, not have agile ops, not have agile scientific processes, and there was a really strong disconnect. So the executive team spends a lot of its effort in this, figuring out where can we stand up a more agile culture, what elements of it fits, because again, when you look at an ops team that's running computers and that sort of stuff, maybe it's not entirely the same thing. I was really struck by the lunchtime discussion, the speaker talking about the groups of mind coming together to be really powerful, because that's really where we're trying to get. We're trying to get our science teams to come together like that, and that's really what Agile is all about. So for us, the most important role for the executive was promoting an Agile culture that matched what we were doing in the software engineering, because when we didn't have that at first, we kind of had these little isolated pockets of success that were somehow decoupled from what the rest of the entity was trying to do.
All right, so I wanted to follow up actually with a related question. So at least from a few of you, what would be your direct personal involvement in helping to enable Agile and Lean practices? So in your role as an executive, what's your personal involvement in sustaining things.
So I'll jump in real quick. So, I was the one that brought it and started it. And I'd say two important things as an executive trying to bring Agile into the organization. One was constancy, because Agile, when you first bring it in, there were some rough patches, and I had to commit to this is how we're going to do it, and let the people know that when we hit those first rough patches, yep, that was a rough patch. The other one, and this is going to sound funny, and maybe as taxpayers you won't love this, but was embrace failure. I had to be willing to really embrace failure and let the teams know that that was okay. I remember we had a retrospective looking at what was a data system for a satellite launch. So this satellite was going to go up. We were going to have to collect the data. It just didn't go well early in this Agile process. At the retrospective, we went through, why didn't this go well? Why didn't this team work together? Oh, well, the scientists never showed up at our meetings. They weren't there to give us the requirements. The documentation from the manufacturer never showed up. A whole list of things. And so, my heart was, oh my God, we're dead. And I had to smile and say, you know what? Good, we've learned from this. We're gonna be better the next iteration, and really believe it. And the next iterations we were, and things started to come up to speed. It was that. So my important role was don't panic, be constant, and let people know that this is our culture. This is what we're doing. And then then people see that and they say, well, it's okay now that I've seen people fail and not be run out of here, to say this isn't working. And that's what ultimately gets us better in that next iteration and keeps this whole process moving forward.
Yeah,
I'll take a shot at it. Yeah, my personal involvement has evolved obviously over 8 years, but I would say now it's still really executive Agile champion. Since we started, we've been through 2 presidents and 3 CTOs. With each change, there is a certain amount of education that has to go on back and forth, right? We need to understand what the new CTO expects and what the new president expects, and then there has to be a reciprocal education backwards of how we operate. And everybody has a differing desire to understand differing levels of detail, right? One CTO, nothing at all, and another one very engaged. Some other things that you kind of see come and go, at least in our organization, is, during a certain era, and for us, it's largely driven by market conditions. When the market's doing great, we're doing great, plenty of money. But you'll see that, sometimes it's really a strong desire. We'll have an 18-month cycle where just the ability to deliver brand new greenfield type things, is super exciting. We're willing to throw a lot of money at stuff and see what we can conjure up, and managing, leading the possibility. Then you'll see the market kind of tank, and it becomes more about, managing probability. My personal involvement is kind of trying to shape the energy in our Agile program to make sure that we understand what's going on, what's influencing our executives, what do our projects look like, and how can we, maintain relevance in everything from the way we speak about things, the types of questions that we ask, and the type of emotions really that our product owners are going to be bringing to the table, depending on what kind of cycle we're in. Architecture is another thing that kind of comes and goes over 8 years. It's a pendulum type thing where, when you're blowing and going and the money's flying in, no one really cares too much about architecture. Then the pendulum swings the other way, and suddenly you got to figure out how you're going to integrate architecture in every single step that you take, in your Agile delivery. So my job is really just to kind of keep a pulse on that, and and kind of be that conduit, bringing in Agile coaches when we need to bring in Agile coaches, and just making sure that we're current.
All right, so we'll go to another audience question. I do want to mention, don't panic. It's a great slogan that Eric mentioned. We've got stickers out at our table right out here with the don't panic slogan. So if you like that slogan too, take it away. We get a question right here.
Hi, I work for a huge worldwide organization. We're about $4 billion a year, and we've got multiple teams spread across the world. I've got programmers in Manila, development staff here in Denver, out in Philadelphia. I've got deployment and release management staff at data centers all over the world. And Mark, you started to touch on this when you talked about development staff here in Denver and in New York. How would you suggest we resolve some of the problems that I'm sure you can imagine are going to come up when we've got, staff in Manila coming to work as we're getting off work here in Denver, 12 hours difference? How are we going to address some of those things that are going to come up with widely geographically dispersed teams?
I was only able to hear about half of that, but you're asking, when you got these multiple time zones, how do you manage that?
Yeah, how do we manage that, and how are we going to manage some of the communication issues? Obviously we can't do scrum and stand-ups when half our team is 12 hours off.
Yeah. Well, boy, my experience has been you can. To make it a little bit more complicated, we also have been working with Agile Scrum teams in India for about 6 years now. So we've got Denver, New York, and India. And actually, it's almost easier working with India than it is New York. It's a great question. What we try to do is we'll trade off. When we're working with India, and generally they want to do it our way to make it easy on us. But we still have sprint reviews with both teams there. When teams are working together on things, we do sprint reviews that includes both teams. We put huge smart boards in each team area. And it's the same brand and everything that we've got in Denver, New York, and Chennai, India, so that people can see each other and they can draw on the boards and those types of things. That's for sprint reviews. For stand-ups, it's not feasible. For stand-ups, the way it works with India when we're doing joint projects, a lot of times you can get them working on their own stuff and you don't necessarily have a scrum or anything like that going on. But for stand-ups, the only way that we've really been successful with it is they have somebody at each location. They have someone in Denver and someone in New York in the case of India, and they communicate to the team. When the team in India comes in at 8 o'clock in the evening our time, the person here in Denver communicates with the team and brings them up to speed of what's going on, what work got across the finish line, what impediments are still in the way, and that type of thing. But it wasn't terrible. I'll tell you another big key is to the extent possible when there's a big epic. When you got something that's going to take 6+ months, and it's going to cost, millions of dollars, get the teams together for kickoff. Right? We have flown to India more often than not. We have India come to us, and with New York, we do the same thing. We'll travel to New York for a kickoff, or we'll have them come to our place for a kickoff. We don't do that for every single epic, but for those really big ones that high exposure, a lot at stake, then we make sure that the teams are together for that kickoff. Was that your question?
All right, why don't we take the next question?
One of the things I think we all face is our CEO and our CFO, they're responsible to the board. And so every fall we go off and we do the big strategic planning initiative. And we develop these roadmaps based on high-level objectives that are decided at that point in time. And then a sales forecast are put together shortly thereafter. And that's delivered to the board. And the CEO is expected to deliver on that plan, and any deviation could cost him his job or her job. How do you bridge that process with the Agile delivery process? Because there's certainly no way at that point in time we know when those major initiatives are going to be able to be delivered.
So we handle it through, because we have that enterprise list 1 through N, the execs are charged with making sure that the promises made to the board or the things that are needed for our market, whatever success is, that we make sure those are the highest priority items. If we have, conflict with something that's taking up, we have a pretty good visibility into our capacity. So I would say the first part that helps us is there's some appetite control on our execs and the board and that sort of thing. So that helps a ton. But when we do run into things like the president says, hey, you can keep your plan at the last minute, that changes things because what you were going to be working on is not the thing you're going to be working on. Now you're going to make that happen. So the ability to move things around in that prioritization, if we have to, we can stand up another Agile team with a partner staff aug type situation. We have not had to do that yet. That's kind of our backup plan. We've been able to handle it through prioritization. And then just, I guess, managing up that capacity management, managing up with that so that they don't get their eyes bigger than their stomachs.
Man, yeah, prioritization, if you can get that, that is awesome. Yeah, we have a very similar process, you know, where everybody goes to dreamland and then they come back and, you know, and you got all this stuff to do. I'm being, you know, whimsical about it, but it is very important stuff. But it's rare that it can all be done, you know, and I think everybody even kind of knows that, you know, so you do need that prioritization mechanism to be able to push back. But that is one of the most important art sciences that I've ever seen, to be able to facilitate priority conversation at the executive level. But that is the key. You know, find out, you know, what those you know, what the most important things are, and then as your organization evolves, you find people that are very adept at being able to start laying out the epics that are associated with that roadmap, and start, you know, breaking it down, start identifying product owners that would be, you know, good fits, you know, for each of those critical path items, you know, and let, you know, kind of let Agile take its course, if you will. But prioritization is king. You know, a value-based prioritization at that.
My question centers around work in progress in your adoption period. So it doesn't seem like when anyone converts to Agile, they probably stop all projects and then start up. Did you have big projects that were in flight, and let's say you were, you know, whatever your process was prior to that, did they continue on that process? Did you try to, how did you work around that?
Boy, I won't be much help for you on that one. We did not try to take anything that was already in flight and convert it to Agile. We let everything take its course. You know, if it was being run waterfall or iterative or, you know, RUP, whatever the case was, you know, we let it finish its course. We did have a couple of examples where that was the cure, where people asked, hey, could you come in and start doing this project Agile? But then it was almost like a full stop and an assessment, you know, and a creation of backlog items and picking it up from there. So it was almost kind of like a cataclysmic event almost, if we were going to try to change the methodology that we were delivering the project. But what, you know, when we were in adoption, the biggest thing we did was make sure the first couple things we give the teams, it was kind of okay if they failed. You know, don't throw them in the limelight with anything super important, and let them get their feet wet. Fail a few times and start kind of upping the ante on the you know, on the criticality of the projects that we gave.
Did you have any teams that would work on both projects, work on a Agile, work with a project that is waterfall at the same time as working on Agile projects?
Yeah, that is a reality. You know, obviously we try to mitigate that as much as we can, but when new team members come in, they often have some prior commitments they're trying to wrap up. We don't do it on purpose. You know, we try to make that, you know, the exception. But yeah, so sometimes team members will come on, but we put what they're doing on the backlog, right? They're not, whatever it is they're doing, even if it's something that's, you know, completely different than what the team's working on, it still gets talked about at every stand-up, and it's part of a sprint review. Yeah, and typically their stuff stays pretty high because they're, you know, they're trying to wrap something up, and we're trying to get them committed to the epic. So we want to, you know, we've even had instances where we'll pitch in and help. Other team members will pitch in and help that person wrap up their backlog so that they can get committed to the epic. You know, on-call is another example where consistently, here that's not, that, you know, for on-call, that is not the exception. It is the norm that you will have team members that all of a sudden get tapped on the shoulder because something went bump, and they got to burn a whole day working on a production problem. That's where your scrum masters just got to be paying attention and, you know, and monitoring that capacity. You know, we do pay very close attention when we start a sprint. You know, who's on call? who's on call during this 2-week sprint, so that the Scrum Master is aware of that, and it is a known risk going into the sprint that someone might get commandeered for on call.
I'll say that we have very, very similar experience in that. Basically, we couldn't just drop the legacy products as much as we wanted. We tried really hard to cap it, so the target number I gave my team was no more than 30% of everybody's time on that. 30% was kind of arbitrary. The thing I really loved about, and still love about Agile, was that it gave me real insight into, well, if I'm letting them bleed this off, how much is it hurting the delivery of my widget because of the velocity, because I could see I was taking this much resource away from the Agile team. The new thing that I was really excited about, gosh, if I could keep them down to 20%, I could get that a couple weeks earlier. So having that tool for me to work with was really great, because then I could go around and show that person that maybe, your legacy thing is really delaying us on something that's really more important to you, and get some negotiation there. So having all that monitoring was really helpful in the process.
All right, seems like we're maybe ready to move on. I know the gentleman at the front table here has been patiently waiting.
Thank you. I actually had enough time to formulate 2 questions at this point. But
one at a time. You get one chance and then somebody else.
All right. Carol, I'd like to hear you and the panel discuss a little bit more when you talk about governance using Agile practices. I'd like to understand a little bit more about what that entails in detail.
Sure. So we have some, we call them defining objectives, which are the strategic initiatives that we're chatting with the board about. And then we have a swim lane for mandates, and we have a swim lane for what we call sustainability, but it would be foundational work, like say, maybe we need a new data mart or something like that. So there's kind of these, for us it's 5 swim lanes that are, there's teams there that are formulated under Agile principles that are prioritizing within their swim lane, and then they feed that to the execs who prioritize the big list, the 1 through N list. And then the teams pull, we have stable teams, so the teams stay together, the work goes to them. They pull from that list, is how it works. So the governance piece is those first 2 chunks, the vetting and prioritizing by those sub-teams, and then the execs take a cut at actually blessing it getting into the backlog so it can be pulled. Does that answer your question?
I think for us with our government interaction is by far and away our most challenging bit of work. We pretty much have a fixed bid that you have to give at the very beginning. You have a fixed duration, and we can only throw so much time, and money at it. So obviously you've set yourself up. We've had to really teach teams how to, even though your scope is technically fixed, how you deliver that scope is where you have your variability. And so even though your dates are fixed, your cost might be fixed, you need to find a way to deliver compliance in those time frames, even though that may not be the ultimate solution. And that's really hard for teams to transition their head around because they're expecting to do the entire thing. So that's a big factor for sure on the government side.
All right, well, maybe we'll come back, but I do want to make sure somebody else gets a chance.
So I want to piggyback a little bit. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Yeah.
On what you just said about the fixed bid and having a little bit of flexibility in the scope. In the past, we judged success of software projects by the schedule, scope, cost, and kind of understood success as meeting one of those 3. And of course, in all of our sessions, we talk more about delivering value on the practitioner level. So here's my question to you as executives, because I hear a lot of interesting disconnects between the executive level and the practitioner level in my training travels. What do you as executives do to help change the mindset away from, or maybe you haven't yet, I don't know, we'll see, away from schedule, scope, cost as a measure of success, and instead on business outcomes as a measure of success? And what, if any, progress have you made in that area?
Well, I tell you, my favorite thing to preach is the idea of deliver as much as you possibly can with the least amount of work possible. And that concept at an executive level doesn't always resonate, because it sounds like, well, you guys just want to do the least amount of work you can. No. And so I think that message, continually hammering that message and saying, you may not have this grand vision, but we're going to deliver something. You're not going to lose it all because you don't have anything.
Yeah, if I understand your question, it's still an evolving thing, even after 8 years. Kind of the further up the food chain you go, frankly, the less understanding they have of what it is you're doing. And they're just looking at the high-level metrics. They're looking for green and yellow and red, and how you doing on burn rate, and and cost, and and all those types of things. So it's really the most effective way, and I won't call it completely successful, is to, when you're working with that product owner, you're helping them with their story. Still not once, even in a fixed bid kind of a situation, has the product really turned out like anybody really thought it was going to turn out. And that's a good thing, right? Because all the pork barrel stuff got cut out, and the entitlement scope that we had over here got ripped out because there wasn't really going to be any value in that. And good old-fashioned time pressures, even cut out some of the lower level fat that would have been good but not great, had we got it done. But helping position that product owner with the value proposition of the very nonlinear course that we took to success, so that they can preach that up to their boss and all the way up through the ranks of regardless of what the little executive summary that started 6 months ago said. Here's where we landed, and here's why you should be excited about it. Leveraging the Agile teams helps a little bit on the burn rate because it's, it's kind of a fixed cost going through, and it's the same number of people all the time. And, and if you're saying, hey, wet finger there, we think we're going to be done in July, you already know what the cost is going to be. So there's not a whole lot of scrutiny on that along the way. But the scrutiny is more on, what did that high-level executive see as an executive summary of what you started, and what did you end up with? And the good news is it's rarely the same. But you've got to make sure you're keeping your product owner communicating up the lines on those changes along the way.
And I'm probably from as rigid a cost and delivery structure as there could possibly be. I can't imagine that there's worse. I hope not for you guys' sake. But one of the things that Agile has brought and really helped me with is, you start to see where you are in this much earlier in the process. And if you have good communication to your executive level, and you can say, look, this team is, you hope that's ahead, and we're going to have extra capacity, and we're going to add new features. But most of the time, they're optimistic, and okay, we're going to have to trade some features off. Then we work the story that says, are we to the point where this is now a critical situation? We're not going to be able to launch this satellite because we're so far behind on these deliveries. Or is it what you were saying, stuff that, okay, we really, really wanted, but now it could be jettisoned, we're still going to be okay. And by communicating that early and constantly, I've personally had a lot of success because they understand that the one thing that I've found that executives and higher in the government really hates is the big surprise, which is, we've been building for 2 years, you promised you'd get this done for $3 million, and then I didn't get it done and I need another $3 million. So by the tools that Agile gives you for monitoring velocity, for communicating, for setting what we call the water level of a project, and seeing that we're always above that water level, I think we've had really great success in engaging the executive level and helping them see where we are and what we need to do.
From our part, we've taken at least the vocabulary around measuring, validating a hypothesis from Lean Startup. We've typically had a kind of a measurement cycle after a release. I think Mark said in his opener that deliverables will always matter, right? We have to deliver something. Cost will always matter because it better cost less to make it than it did to sell it. But we've added maybe a couple of years ago pretty rigorous measurement cycles, almost every basically 2 iterations, depending on the team that's producing that. Just testing that hypothesis that was made at the beginning, whether it's a new feature or a change or an additional button functionality, and just casting that hypothesis out of, I think this will do a 5% uptick in usage. If that doesn't work, then we can stop midstream and question why we thought it was an uptick. Where did we go wrong? Were we just flat out wrong, or was it a poor implementation? Did we solve the wrong problem? And that certainly helps, because it helps to the rest of the business, not just the executives, but show that not only are we building products quickly, but we're building the right product quickly. Someone mentioned, and I can't remember who, my apologies, but alluded to spending 9, 12, 18 months building the wrong thing. Everyone's done that, and it's wonderful, and it's beautiful, and does exactly what we thought it was going to do, and nobody cares. So getting that frequent check-in certainly is way more important as a business and at the executive level, just to validate that we're headed in the right direction.
So one thing I'm hearing out of that maybe is an undercurrent a bit is it sounds like perhaps there's a need to have strong authority in the product owner role, or whatever your equivalent is, in order to drive some of these decisions to cut out some of that fat. And I wonder if a few of you might comment on that. Is that true that product owners must have that authority? And if so, how do you give them that authority?
Well, our experience has been is sometimes they have it, sometimes they don't. I'm sure everyone else has experienced the same thing, where sometimes you just have a fantastic product owner that knows this stuff cold, and they have all kinds of pull in the organization, and people respect their opinion, and other times you get the leftovers, right? But it's still an important project, but maybe they're not quite the right one. It's shaped the fit. Our experience has been, when you can, gosh, it's so awesome when they can just take the reins and make the decisions, and you don't have to second guess them and go check that they made the right decision. Other times you got to second guess them on every single decision, right? And figure out who it is you need to bring in as an extended stakeholder, whether it be, hey, would you mind coming to sprint reviews, or setting up a weekly one-on-one with them to make sure that they know that the key decisions that are being made. Sometimes that's someone on the technology side. It's been me sometimes. Other times it's somebody on the business side that we can kind of call it the epic conscience, if you will, or something like that. That's always kind of going around and reaffirming decisions that have been made. But it's just so unpredictable what kind of product owner you're going to get. It's really, but someone's got to play that role. You've got to make sure you can't just go blindly thinking that your product owner's got it under control. You got to kind of inspect it for a while to make sure that it's really working out that way, and then take action if it's not.
If I had my druthers, an ideal product owner would have the skill of negotiation as primary, because that, it's not so much an authority that they can set the water line or take in or out features. It's about working with the stakeholder to do that. The other skill that a product owner for us is really important is seeing across the enterprise, because we have a lot of, as I've described, scientific groups that are working together. Sometimes they each want the same sort of thing, and if they could just find a commonality. So to have that product owner that has that insight to say, I'm not just building widget A and widget B, but there's really a way we can combine these and save some time, that story carries back so well to the stakeholders that, I'm leveraging a little of yours, a little of your time, and we're going to end up with a much better thing for both of you. If I could have those two skills in a product owner, I'd take it every day.
So we are doing roadmaps and prioritizing 1 through N, and looking at WIP and things like that. So after our lunchtime keynote, I start to think about what's next, right? So if that's running smoothly, that means that we probably have good connection between strategy and execution, and we're probably having some good conversations with sales about when they can engage in new contracts, et cetera. So then, do you have any inkling as to, what's next as far as the amazing breakthroughs that your organization might have in, I guess, not just in strategy, but how you change as an organization. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but is there anything that comes after well done prioritization and flow from strategy all the way through execution?
So for us, I would say that we're doing it, but I wouldn't say we're doing it as well as we should. So for me, internally, strengthening a few areas. The product owners, I mean, if we could have some product owners that had big picture skills and the ability to negotiate more than we do today, that's one area that needs to mature and grow. Our leadership at probably most levels, it's a struggle. Agile is a struggle because it's more about empowerment and talent development and that sort of thing, as opposed to dealing out the work, which is what they used to do a lot more of, or being more decision maker rather than facilitating decision making. So that would be some of the internal stuff that we'll be focusing on next. And empowerment just by itself is really, really, really hard. And I think building that skill throughout the organization would be worthwhile work. And then I think at the highest organizational level, really, I think we've started it, but we're certainly not there yet, really making the transition to having in our heads that the ultimate product owner is our customer. And so being able to make the connections to our customers, and I work in health insurance, so you know how broken that is today. So making that connection much more solid than it is today, so that we truly are serving our customers. That's an area where we have a lot of growth yet to do.
If I understood you, I think you're really smart to be wondering, hey, it looks like I got it. I can't possibly have it, do I? And you're right. Yeah, you got your priorities all lined up. The whip's looking good. Everybody's happy. But yeah, not everybody's happy, right? There's always people that aren't happy, and you got to kind of be aware of that. It's just like any other kind of relationship; it will come back and bite you at some point. And I think maybe a good way to think about it is always assume it still needs to be tweaked. And when I say tweaked, it's really more about priority, and the value proposition of what it is you're doing. And I found at times the Agile team can be very persuasive and become the expert a lot of times and help change priority. We have fallen into the trap before where, hey, there it is, man, bam, 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 bam. But just like that path to success that we were talking about earlier is very nonlinear, and where you end up is not where you thought you were going to end up. It's kind of the same with priorities. You got it up on your board, and you got your backlog laid out. The odds are something needs to change in there, and just always be listening for that.
No, I definitely did not mean to imply that we were doing it well. I was just thinking, if my job is to look forward and anticipate what's coming next, is there anything, my thought around that is, if I know what's coming next, maybe I can start to integrate it now, even though we're not doing this well, and that might help. But again, I know it does take a long, long time, and we are just in the beginning. So I just didn't want any misconceptions.
Yeah.
Any other panelists care to weigh in on that?
I'll say it briefly. I mean, I think one of the things when I look forward, and the lunch talk really helped crystallize it for me, I've heard it presented in other ways, which is, we've left an industrial manufacturing base of how many bolts can you put on that car per hour and measuring things that way. Really now most of us are in high tech or science or some other industry where what we're really doing is managing groups of artists. I mean, talented people, and we've got to put a play together somehow. I'd be surprised if in 10 years there's Agile software conferences that are just software developers. I would be surprised and probably disappointed, because I think this has got to be a whole cultural thing. I think it's got to be integrated. I think it's going to just be called how we work and how efficient organizations run 10 years from now. So if I was to start to think about it, I would start to take some of the principles and think about how you can apply it across your organization, get other people involved in it, and maybe decouple it a little bit from just pure software engineering.
So I had a question for you. You just kind of hit on it, Eric, and Mark, you made me laugh because you mentioned the green, yellow, red project. And I was actually responding to an email to approve my green, yellow, red report to my executives. So it's in our culture, it's difficult because I came in and I'm pushing Agile from the bottom up, from the development side. And I'm wondering if anybody's had experience, and I'm sure that Brian, you're going through it as well. The business still wants to run very waterfall. They want to budget the year before. They want to know exactly how long it's going to take. Here's our list of priorities, and then they pick them. Right? Come Jan 1, they're going to pick your priorities for you, and they want to hold you to a calendar. And then, of course, the business changes priorities during the year. How are you dealing with that sort of impedance mismatch where you're trying to run Agile and the organizations are still stuck in this? They're still 15 years behind us technologically.
Well, I tell you, that is good luck with that. It's brutal. The point I tried to make very briefly is just to say, rather than give me a list of projects that you want done, can you formulate better in your mind how much do you want to invest in a given area? And then you get to pick as we go along and as things evolve throughout the year what you want to do. That's a tough switch. Yeah, that's it. It's tough, right, to get there. But I think then if you prove it and you can say, look, I can adapt to your whims that might occur throughout the year, and it will be based upon a really nice fixed investment. I think somebody said that down here, that what's great about this is that my investment's not going to vary. Yeah. We're going to have a nice fixed investment, and what will vary is what you want. And I think that if you can get that mentality at a budget time, I think you can kind of tip the table a little bit and get it to more of that type of thinking.
So I tried and failed a bunch of times, quite frankly, on the dummy switches and certain things that they wanted to see. And frankly, it's one of the expectations that we have of either the Scrum Master or the product owner to put together those one-page summaries for the executive decks. They're going to want to see it that way. We actually pulled it off and got ourselves removed for those decks. Came back and bit us, right? There wasn't enough transparency about what we were doing. So it wasn't worth trying to push our cultural change that far up the line. It still needed to be in a certain format in a deck that went to the president, once a month. What we did do though is change it a little bit, to include along with red, yellow, green. Yes, we still have red, yellow, green. Showing sprint on sprint velocity. And those types of things, because we're getting questions. Well, how do you know you're really getting the best out of your people? How do you know you're really, that they're improving? And so we added some kind of basic things like sprint on sprint analysis where they could see the trends. If it was going up and down, and if it went down, why? And just a brief little one sentence. Why did you see a 17% drop in time being spent on the epic, right? But long story short, we still do the one-pagers. We still do the executive format, and it's not worth trying to fight it. You can use it to your advantage.
So I'd like the panel's opinion on this afternoon's keynote, where Rod talked about a very profound concept of very lean to no organizational hierarchy. And Rick, I think this was, Eric, this is building on something you started to talk about. That what will this conference look like in 10 years? So what's the opinion of the panel about the notion of lean to no organizational hierarchy?
I'm a believer that it's going to happen. I don't know the pace because there's a lot of resistance to that from very powerful people. But I think it's going to go there because when you look at the success of those companies he's talking about, you can't argue with those kind of dollars. It's crazy to argue with that. Now people will because they like, what they have. They like the status quo. But over time, that's got to erode. So I'm a believer that it is going to transition, and we will see those kinds of conferences. I just don't know how quickly.
You know, from my perspective, I'm already starting to see it in terms of like self-organizing teams, that I have groups that, I mean, I go out and I hire really well-educated, highly skilled technical people that have experience, and they find each other. They know what they need to get done, and they find the DBA they need. They find the Agile team they need to support their software development, and they're kind of doing it themselves. And so these self-organizing teams and that concept of, you know, how is that going to work? What I'd really love to see, you know, is a management conference in years to say, how do you deal with that? What are the issues that are coming with that? Because there is going to be some resistance to it, because it is a strange feeling when you're like, well, the people are doing the right things, but how did they get there? Why wasn't I the one that issued the roadmap and the action plan for the year? How is that going to work? But I'm already starting to see it, so I can't imagine it changing back the other direction.
Yeah, I'm with Eric on that one. You know, financial services is probably a little bit more stodgy than most. Maybe not quite as bad as
not more than me.
Oh no, we'll compete.
But you know, we're already saying the right things, even at the very top. That that we need to have more self-organization. You know, people know in their heart of hearts that governance is best done by teams instead of passed down to them, you know, through policy. But it's still going to take time, much like Eric's seeing. We see the self-organized teams. We even see at the, you know, vice president level, people giving up control, right, and becoming leaders instead of managers. But it's going to take a bit more time. But the good news is, even in financial services, we know we need to get there. But I'm not quite sure what'll put us to that next, you know, to that next level. But I think it's either going to be market that'll drive it if it gets just so, you know, so bad that we'll have to completely fundamentally rethink the way that, you know, that we manage in the financial services industry, or the fact that you know, you're not going to be able to get good talented resources if you don't operate that way. You know, but we see it. I certainly firmly believe in it. You know, the democracy in the workplace, some of the stuff World Blue's doing as well, super exciting stuff. That I, much like Susan, I think the successful companies of the future will embrace it and already have. Yeah.
I can only just agree. And it's not even an organization. At ReadyTalk, we actually push this pretty hard. So we have some fairly self-organizing teams. There's still a lot of control that comes with that. But I feel like we've made some valid steps. But we're nowhere near some of the companies that were mentioned this afternoon. But I don't think it's just it's companies. Culturally, we're moving that way, and I actually think that that'll happen before us older companies move towards that. I think the culture and next generations will grow up with just that ubiquity of information that kind of has defined what command and control means, is kind of information access, not even hoarding in a negative sense, but just access to a wider perspective. As that becomes more ubiquitous, I think that will be the turnover. I think that those conferences that we're talking about will move more towards coaching. How do I enable teams to get that perspective and then be efficient and move forward well with other teams? I think that will end up being the focus of what that education looks like.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't see a lot of companies transitioning. I really don't. I think it's going to be, you know, it's just hard enough to get a command and control structure to stop telling people what to do, much less give up the things that they value their whole careers. I see those startup companies gobbling them up. And that's the way that transformation will occur, unfortunately.
All right, so I'm going to put the panel on the spot. Quick answer on this one. If you had to pick just one thing, what's the most important factor in sustaining an agile organization? So ask for a quick response from any of you or all of you.
I'm going to cheat and say twofold. But because I think they go together. Not only a passion, but also a willingness to compromise. You need to be able to get in the conversation, but have an actual conversation about it.
Okay.
adaptability. Pay attention to what's going on around you and never be afraid to adapt.
I'll go with Agile champion that was mentioned before. Someone has to be a champion, not just for the methodology, but for the change of the culture and be willing to take the arrows that come and keep that momentum going forward.
Never assume you're healthy enough to continue, so keep tending the garden.
And just don't ever underestimate the difficulties around a culture change.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes to that is, your culture will eat your strategy for breakfast.
Yes, it will.
Yeah.
Yes, all right. So I want to take this time to thank the panel. So could everybody give a round of applause for our awesome panelists?